The planet was in chaos. Explosions echoed across the sky, lighting up the night with bright flashes. Ships in the sky battled fiercely, lasers cutting through the air. On the ground, the alien queen, a magnificent and powerful ruler, stood surrounded by her soldiers. Her eyes were sharp, watching every movement, her mind already calculating her next move. She had led her people through many wars, but this time the odds were against them. Her fleet was destroyed, and the enemies had breached the gates of her palace. The walls shook as another explosion rattled the structure. It would not be long before they reached her. The queen's heart raced, but she did not show fear. Her people depended on her, and she would die fighting if it meant they would survive. Her soldiers stood firm, ready to protect her with their lives. But just as she was preparing to make her final stand, a sudden voice broke through the noise, calm and clear. "Follow me if you want to live." The queen turned sharply to see a human soldier standing in the middle of the battlefield, his eyes locked onto hers. He wore no armor, just a simple combat suit, yet there was a strange confidence about him. Behind him, a small group of humans moved swiftly, clearing a path through the chaos. "Who are you?" the queen demanded, her voice steady but cold. The sight of a human on her battlefield was unexpected. They were rarely seen outside their own territories, and certainly not in the middle of her war. "My name is Rook," the soldier replied without hesitation. "I've been sent to get you out of here. You're coming with me." The queen's first instinct was to refuse. Humans were not her allies, and she was more than capable of defending herself. Yet the enemy was closing in, and she had no other options. She glanced at her soldiers, who looked to her for guidance. Without a word, the queen stepped forward, her eyes still suspicious. "Lead the way, then," she said, her voice firm. Rook nodded and began to move, the queen following closely behind. The human soldier was fast, moving with precision as he cut through the chaos. His movements were quick, efficient, and without hesitation. The queen could not help but notice how smoothly he operated, how he seemed to know exactly where to go and what to do. They reached the edge of the palace, where a hidden transport ship waited. Rook helped the queen climb aboard, then signaled to his team to take off. The ship shot up into the sky, dodging blasts and weaving through the air like a bird avoiding a storm. The queen remained silent, watching the human soldier as he worked. She had never seen humans fight like this. Most she had encountered were weak, easily defeated, yet this one was different. He was strong, determined, and willing to risk his life for someone he did not even know. As the ship soared higher, the queen turned to him, her curiosity now fully piqued. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time. Rook glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it's a queen." The queen felt a strange warmth at his words, though she quickly masked it with her usual icy demeanor. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Rook smiled slightly, though it was not a mocking smile. "You don't have to believe me. You'll see soon enough." The ship continued to rise, leaving the battlefield behind. The queen looked out the window, watching her planet become a small dot in the distance. A feeling of uncertainty lingered in her chest. She had never been so close to defeat before. She had always been in control, always a step ahead. Yet now, she was being saved by a human soldier. They flew for hours, the landscape below changing, from the desolate war-torn lands to lush green forests. The queen was amazed by the beauty of the world below. She had always seen her people as superior, and humans were often seen as little more than pests. Yet this human was proving to be something more than that. Finally, the ship landed at a hidden base deep in the mountains. Rook turned to the Queen as the hatch opened, revealing the small outpost. "This is where you'll be safe," he said. "You can rest here until we figure out what's next." The Queen stepped off the ship, still unsure of what to think. She had been saved by a human, but she could not yet understand why he had risked everything for her. She had always been taught to distrust humans, to see them as weak and unworthy. But this soldier was changing that perception, little by little. As she followed Rook into the base, she felt a strange connection forming between them. It was not something she could explain, not yet. But she knew that this human, this soldier who had saved her life, was not just a simple warrior. There was something more to him, something that made her wonder if there was more to humanity than she had ever imagined. But she would not let herself dwell on it. Not yet. She was a queen, after all. And a queen could not afford to show weakness, even if a human soldier had shown her a kindness she had never expected. The Queen sat silently in a small, dimly lit room in the hidden base. The walls were made of metal, the air thick with the scent of machinery. Outside, she could hear the soft hum of human voices and the sound of distant engines. The base was quiet, yet there was an underlying tension in the air. She had never felt so far from her throne, so removed from her people. Her mind raced, the battle, her escape, the human soldier, Rook, who had saved her. Everything had happened so fast. Just hours ago, she had been the proud ruler of her planet, standing tall against her enemies. Now, she was in the care of humans, hiding away, like a commoner. Despite the discomfort of the situation, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of safety in the human base. The soldiers there had treated her with respect, and Rook had gone out of his way to ensure she was comfortable. It was nothing like what she had expected. She had always believed that humans were inferior, weak creatures, but this experience was making her question everything. Rook appeared at the door, interrupting her thoughts. His expression was serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made the Queen pause. He stepped inside, holding a small tray with food and drink. "You need to eat," Rook said gently, placing the tray on the table in front of her. His tone was different from the way he had spoken before, when they were on the battlefield. Now he seemed more caring. The Queen studied him for a moment. She could see the weariness in his face, the exhaustion from the battle. She had seen countless soldiers in her time, but none had ever looked at her like this. None had ever cared for her well-being the way he did. It confused her. "I'm not hungry," she replied coldly, though her stomach had begun to growl, betraying her words. Rook didn't seem to mind. He sat down across from her, his eyes not leaving hers. "You need your strength," he said. "We're not out of danger yet, and we can't help anyone if we're weak." The Queen crossed her arms, still unwilling to admit she needed anything. She was the Queen. She didn't need help from anyone. She had always been self-sufficient, always in control. But something about Rook's presence made her hesitate. He sat there for a moment, waiting. His patience was clear, but so was his determination. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no sense of superiority. He was simply there, offering his support, in silence. Finally, the Queen sighed and reached for the food. It was simple, nothing compared to the feasts she had enjoyed as a monarch, but it would do. She took a small bite, then another, and before long, the food was gone. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. Still, she refused to look at Rook as she ate. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rook smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're welcome. I'm glad you're feeling better." The Queen set the empty tray aside and turned to face him. "I don't understand," she said bluntly. "Why did you help me? You risked your life, your people's lives, for someone like me. Someone who doesn't even belong here. Rook's smile faded, and his expression grew more serious. Because that's what we do, he said, his voice steady. We help people. We don't care where they come from, who they are, or what they've done. Everyone deserves a chance. Even a queen. The queen stared at him, her mind spinning. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. Her people, her soldiers, they fought for power, for status, for the survival of their species. But Rook spoke of something different, something she had never truly understood. Compassion, kindness, the willingness to risk everything for another. I don't believe it, she said, shaking her head. You're telling me that humans who have struggled so much would give up everything for someone like me? Rook leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. We fight for each other. We fight for those who can't fight for themselves. It's not about power or pride. It's about something deeper. The queen felt something stir within her chest. She couldn't name it. She had spent her entire life being taught that strength was the only thing that mattered. That control was everything. But here, sitting across from her, was a human soldier who didn't care about any of that. He was willing to risk his life, to offer his help, without asking for anything in return. Why? The queen asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why do you do this? What's in it, Fa? Or you? Rook's eyes softened, and for the first time, the queen saw vulnerability in his gaze. It's not about what's in it for me. It's about what's in it for everyone. If I don't help you, then who will? We all need to look out for each other. That's how we survive. The queen's mind raced. She had never thought of it that way. Her life had always been about power and control, about ruling over others. But here was a human soldier, someone who had no claim to any power, who was offering her something she had never truly understood: care, compassion, and the belief that everyone deserved to be helped. Rook stood up and turned to leave, but paused at the door. Rest, Your Majesty. We have a long road ahead. The queen watched him go, her thoughts still swirling. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. She had always seen humans as weak, but now she wasn't so sure. For the first time in her life, the queen realized that there was more to strength than just power. There was something deeper, something she had never understood until now. And that something, she feared, was what made her feel so small in the presence of this human soldier. The queen stood by the large window, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of stars outside. It had been several days since her escape, and while the hidden base had offered a temporary shelter, it was not where she belonged. Her people were still in danger, her planet still under attack. And yet, in this strange, new place among humans, she felt a strange sense of unease, mixed with something she couldn't quite place. Rook had been by her side constantly, helping her adjust to life in the human base. He had never once treated her as anything other than an equal. She had expected him to boast of his actions or to demand something in return for saving her life, but he never did. He was always patient, calm, and respectful. She had never met anyone like him before. The days passed slowly. Rook spent much of his time working with his fellow soldiers, organizing defense plans and gathering information on the enemy. The queen observed from a distance, wondering how these humans had managed to stay alive so long in a galaxy that seemed to care little for their survival. They were a young species, yet their determination and will to survive surpassed anything she had ever witnessed. One afternoon, Rook invited her to join him for a meeting with the other human leaders at the base. She hesitated at first, unsure of her place among them, but he reassured her. "It's important that you understand how we work together," he said, his tone gentle. "You're a part of this now." The Queen followed him into the meeting room, where several humans gathered around a large table. They all turned their attention to her as she entered, but Rook stepped forward and introduced her as an ally. There were no whispers, no judgment, just respectful nods and gestures of welcome. She sat at the table watching as they discussed strategies and plans to combat the enemy forces. She listened carefully, her sharp mind processing the information, but she also watched Rook. He didn't speak much during the meeting. Instead, he observed, offering suggestions only when necessary. It was clear that his strength wasn't in dominating conversations, but in understanding when and how to act. The Queen felt a strange sense of comfort as she sat among these humans. She had always been used to taking charge, to being the center of attention in any room. But here, for the first time in her life, she was simply a part of the group. No one expected her to be a ruler or a leader. Instead, she was allowed to contribute in her own way. She realized that Rook had not just saved her life. He had shown her a new way of living, one that valued cooperation over power. After the meeting, Rook led her back to her room. They walked in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. The Queen finally spoke, breaking the quiet between them. "Why do you fight like this?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. "Why do humans risk so much for others? It doesn't make sense." Rook turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It's because we've learned that survival isn't just about power. It's about helping each other. We fight because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. We fight because every life matters, no matter where it comes from or who it belongs to." The Queen was silent for a long moment, processing his words. She had never understood such a mindset. In her world, survival had always been about strength, control, and the ability to dominate. To hear that these humans were willing to sacrifice for each other, to fight for others without expecting anything in return, was a concept that felt foreign to her. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "I've always been taught that strength is everything, that I must rule, that I must lead. I never knew that helping others could be a form of strength, too." Rook smiled gently. "It's not easy to change what you've always known. But sometimes, it's the smallest acts of kindness, the willingness to fight for someone else, that show the most strength." The Queen looked at him, her heart heavy with thoughts she had never allowed herself to have before. Could it really be that simple? Could strength come from love, compassion, and the willingness to fight for those who could not fight for themselves? "I never thought I would learn so much from a human," she said softly. Rook chuckled lightly. "I never thought I'd learn from a queen. But here we are." The Queen couldn't help but smile, though it was small. It was a smile that reflected the shift in her thinking, a smile that showed she was beginning to understand the value of things she had once dismissed as weakness. Later that evening, as the Queen lay in her small, quiet room, she thought about the life she had left behind. Her people, her planet, and her throne. She had always been the center of everything. She had never known what it was like to need someone else. But now, with Rook's words echoing in her mind, she understood. Strength was not about ruling over others. It was about standing together, fighting side by side. It was about doing what was right, not because of power or status, but because it was the only way to truly survive. The Queen closed her eyes, knowing that she still had a long road ahead. There would be battles to fight, decisions to make, and challenges to face. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't alone. She had allies. She had Rook. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn how to be more than a queen. She would learn how to be a leader who valued the lives of others, no matter their origin. The days grew colder, and the tension at the human base became more evident. Though the Queen had found a strange comfort in the safety of the base, her mind never fully settled. The war was still out there, and her people were still under threat. The Queen knew she had to return to find a way to end the war and save her world. But she also knew that returning alone would be suicide. She had spent the last few days in quiet reflection, processing everything she had learned from Rook and the humans around her. Their willingness to fight not for glory, but for each other, had shifted something deep inside her. It wasn't just about strength anymore. It wasn't about ruling over others. It was about working together, about finding ways to survive without leaving anyone behind. She couldn't help but wonder, could this be the key to saving her people? Could she bring them together not by force, but by teaching them the value of unity, of compassion? Rook's voice brought her back to the present. "We're ready to move out," he said quietly, stepping into her room. His expression was serious, his eyes holding a look she couldn't quite place. The Queen stood from her chair and turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Are you sure? There's still a lot of danger out there. We don't know if the enemy will let us slip through." "We don't have a choice," Rook replied, his tone steady. "Your people need you, and we can't afford to wait any longer." The Queen nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for this moment, yet now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. But she had no time to hesitate. Her people needed her leadership, and the longer she stayed in this safe place, the more her world would be lost. Together, they made their way to the transport ship. The crew had prepared everything for the journey. The Queen glanced around the room, seeing the faces of the soldiers who had come to help her. These humans, who had risked everything to get her here, were now preparing for the fight to reclaim her world. There were no signs of fear in their eyes, only resolve. Rook led her to a seat at the front of the ship, sitting beside her as the engines powered up. As the ship lifted off the ground and soared into the sky, the Queen looked out the window, seeing the vastness of space ahead. The stars shimmered in the distance, a beautiful reminder of how small she really was in the grand scheme of the universe. "I've been thinking," the Queen began, her voice quiet. "I don't know if my people will accept what I want to do. I'm not sure they'll believe in this unity. The idea that we can work together without having to fight or control each other." Rook looked at her, his face calm. "You can't control how they'll react, but you can show them. You can lead by example. You've learned something that can change everything. All you need to do is show them it's possible." The Queen took a deep breath, her mind swirling with doubt. "And if they don't follow me? If they refuse to change? You'll lead them no matter what," Rook replied firmly. "You're not alone in this. You have me, and you have the people who believe in you." The Queen couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth at his words. The weight of the crown that had always felt so heavy on her head suddenly seemed lighter. She realized that she didn't have to do this alone. In Rook, she had found someone who would stand by her side, someone who would fight not just for her, but for a future they both believed in. As the ship continued its journey, the Queen's thoughts turned to her people. Her planet had been torn, apart by war, by hatred and division. But she had the power to change that. It wouldn't be easy. It might take years to undo the damage, but she was determined to try. She couldn't let the fear of failure hold her back. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of her home planet. The familiar sights of her world were now tainted by the scars of battle. The fields that had once been lush and green were now burned and barren. The cities that had once gleamed with the pride of her people were now smoldering ruins. Her heart ached at the sight, but she knew there was no time for sorrow. The enemy was still out there, and the war was not over. She turned to Rook, who stood by her side, his hand resting on the console. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone gave her the strength to push forward. "We'll make it through this," she said, more to herself than to him. Rook gave a small, reassuring smile. Together, the ship descended into the atmosphere, and the Queen felt a sense of urgency settle within her. They had arrived. Now it was time to fight, not with force or fear, but with something stronger. She had learned that strength wasn't about domination. It was about standing together, facing the challenges head-on, and finding a way to rebuild from the ashes. As the ship touched down on her planet's surface, the Queen's mind was clear. She had a purpose now. She was not just a ruler. She was a leader who would show her people that there was more to life than power. There was hope. There was a future. And it started with them. Together. The Queen stood on the balcony of the small base they had established on her planet's surface. Below her, the soldiers moved quickly, preparing for the next phase of the battle. The air was thick with the scent of dust and metal, the once vibrant land now marked with the scars of war. It had been a week since they had arrived, and though there was progress, the fighting was far from over. The Queen had made her decision. She would not fight this battle alone, nor would she fight it with force. Instead, she would lead by example, showing her people that there was another way. But that path would not be easy, and there was no guarantee they would follow her. Rook had been by her side every step of the way. Since the moment he had saved her life, he had proven time and again that he was not just a soldier, but someone who believed in her. The bond they had formed was growing stronger each day, built on mutual respect, trust, and something deeper. She wasn't ready to name yet. She turned from the balcony and walked toward the war table in the center of the room. Rook was there, working with the others, making plans and coordinating efforts. Despite everything happening around them, he had a calmness to him, a focus that she admired. "You're planning our next move?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Rook looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "We are. We've gathered enough intel to know where the enemy will strike next. We can stop them. But it's going to require all of us working together." The Queen nodded, walking closer to the table. She studied the map in front of her, the markers representing their position and the enemy's movements. They had a chance to win, but it wouldn't be easy. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, the heavy burden of being not just a ruler, but the one to change the way things had always been. "What are your thoughts on all of this?" Rook asked, his voice gentle, almost as if he understood the doubts that were swirling in her mind. The Queen took a deep breath. "I know what I need to do, but I can't help but wonder if my people will believe in this. They've always been taught to fight, to win at any cost. I don't know if they'll follow me if I ask them to lay down their weapons and stand together with others." Rook was silent for a moment, considering her words. "It won't be easy, but you've already shown them something they've never seen before. You've shown them that a leader doesn't just give orders. A true leader leads by example." She looked at him, surprised by the strength in his words. He was right. She had been taught that leadership was about power, about holding control over others. But in the time she had spent with Rook and the humans, she had learned that leadership was something different. It was about trust, respect, and the willingness to fight for what was right, not for glory. "I don't want them to think I've lost my way," the Queen said quietly. "I don't want them to think that I've given up on our cause." Rook stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You haven't given up. You've just chosen a new way to fight. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with words, with actions that show the kind of world we want to build." The Queen looked into his eyes, finding a deep understanding there. She had been so focused on what she could control, on the things she had always known. But now, with Rook's words in her mind, she realized that maybe there was more to life than just fighting to win. Maybe there was strength in giving others the chance to fight for themselves, to work together for something greater than just victory. "We need to make sure we're ready," the Queen said, turning back to the table. "The enemy won't stop. We'll have to face them head-on, but this time we do it as one." Rook smiled, his confidence evident. "We'll make it through this, together." As they finished planning the strategy, the Queen's resolve grew stronger. She knew that the next battle would not just be a physical one. It would be a test of everything she had learned in the past few weeks. Her people had always seen her as a symbol of power and strength, but now she had to show them that true strength was about more than just winning. It was about working together, standing side by side with those who believed in a better future. When the time came for the battle, the Queen was ready. She stood with her soldiers, her people, and Rook by her side. As the first blasts of the enemy's attack echoed through the air, she felt a sense of calm she had never known before. This was her chance to prove that leadership didn't have to be about domination. It could be about unity, about sacrifice, about the strength to lead in a different way. The fighting was fierce, and the losses were heavy. But there was something different about this battle. It wasn't just the Queen leading her people. It was all of them, working together as one. For the first time in her life, the Queen saw what true leadership meant. It was about inspiring others, about showing them that there was more to victory than just fighting. It was about showing them that peace was worth fighting for, that working together was worth the cost. By the end of the battle, the Queen stood, victorious, not because they had defeated the enemy, but because they had done it as a united force. And as she looked around at her people, she knew that things would never be the same. The way she led, the way she viewed her people, and the way she viewed the universe had changed. And for the first time, she understood the full meaning of strength. The battle had ended, but the victory felt different than any the Queen had experienced before. The sound of the enemy retreating echoed through the sky, but she couldn't help feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. They had won, yes, but the real challenge was yet to come. They had shown their strength, but now they would need to rebuild. The Queen stood near the edge of the command center, watching as her people and the human soldiers worked side by side, clearing the remnants of the battle. The smoke still hung heavy in the air, and the ground beneath her feet was scarred with the marks of war. But there was something else she noticed, something she had never seen before in her people. It was hope. Her people, once divided by their pride and their need for dominance, now worked together with the humans, sharing the same goal, survival and peace. She could hear their voices, their laughter, and see the small gestures of kindness exchanged between the soldiers. It was the beginning of something new. A future that had once seemed impossible now felt within reach. Rook appeared beside her, his expression calm, though she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and respect. "You showed them that there's another way to win." The Queen turned to him, her gaze meeting his. "No, Rook. We did it together. It wasn't just me. It was all of us." He smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "I know, but it was you who led them. You showed them that leadership doesn't have to be about power. It's about believing in something bigger." The Queen couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at his words. She had led her people, not by commanding them, but by showing them the way. And in return, they had followed her, not because of her title, but because they had seen the truth in her actions. It was a humbling thought, one that made her realize just how much she had changed. Salora's voice rang out again, this time full of defiance. "You think you can take my people's future, Varrock? You think you can claim what doesn't belong to you?" She raised her sword higher, her eyes blazing with determination. "I will fight for my empire until my last breath." Varrock's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Then we'll see just how far your will can take you." He signaled for his soldiers to move in, and the room exploded into chaos. Blades clashed, gunfire rang out, and the sounds of battle filled every corner of the temple. Ethan ducked behind a pillar to avoid the barrage of gunfire, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to act quickly. Salora needed him, but she also needed the artifact. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Ethan saw that his crew was holding their ground, but it was clear they wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. He looked at the artifact in his hand. It pulsed with energy, as if it were alive. The power it contained was immense, and it was their only hope of stopping Verak. He took a deep breath and ran toward the center of the room, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had to reach Salora, had to give her the artifact. He could see her fighting fiercely, cutting down soldiers with swift, precise movements, but the weight of the battle was beginning to take its toll on her. Ethan reached her just as one of Verak's men lunged at her from behind. Without thinking, he stepped forward and grabbed the soldier, slamming him into the ground. The soldier let out a pained cry as Ethan knocked him unconscious with a well-placed strike. "Salora!" Ethan called, holding out the artifact. "Take it! This is our chance." Salora's eyes flickered toward him, her expression fierce but grateful. She grabbed the artifact, and for a brief moment, their hands touched. The energy from the crystal surged through her, and for a moment, it was as though the entire temple shook with the power it contained. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We can end this now." Verak watched from a distance, his eyes narrowing as he saw the two of them standing together, the artifact now in Salora's hands. His soldiers continued to fight, but the tide was beginning to turn. Ethan could feel it too. The power from the artifact was radiating through the room, and with it came hope. Ethan and Salora stood together, the artifact pulsing with the full force of the Arisian legacy. It was a sight unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, the power of an entire empire contained within that one small crystal. Verak fell to his knees, his face twisted in agony. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "This can't be." With one final burst of energy, the artifact exploded with light, and Verak's forces were scattered, defeated. The room fell silent. The power from the artifact slowly faded, and Ethan could feel the tension leave his body. The temple was silent now, the echoes of battle replaced by the hum of the energy still lingering in the air. The soldiers who had once fought so fiercely lay scattered across the stone floor, and the once proud Verak, the man who had betrayed an entire empire, was nowhere to be seen. He had been defeated, his ambitions shattered by the very power he had sought to control. Ethan stood among the remnants of the battle, his breath heavy but steady. His side still throbbed with pain from the earlier wound, but the adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving a dull ache that only reminded him of the cost of their victory. His eyes scanned the temple, taking in the scene around him. The walls, once dark and foreboding, now seemed to glow faintly, as if the artifact's power had breathed new life into the ancient stones. Salora was still holding the artifact, her grip tight, her eyes focused on the pulsing crystal. She stood in the center of the chamber, looking every bit the leader she had proven herself to be. The battle had been hard, but they had emerged victorious, and now the future of the Arisian Empire was in her hands. For a moment, Ethan thought. He could see a flicker of something in her eyes, a quiet relief mixed with the weight of what had just happened. She had won, but that wasn't the end. The real work, the true rebuilding of her people's legacy, was only beginning. Slowly, Salora turned to face him, the glow of the artifact reflecting in her eyes. "It's over," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We did it." Ethan nodded, but the weight of the situation wasn't lost on him. "We did," he agreed, though he knew there was so much more to come. "But the road ahead won't be easy. There's still so much to rebuild. You can't do it alone." Salora gave him a small, tired smile. I know. I never could. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like there's hope again. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Hope was something the Arisians had lost long ago. It had seemed impossible, but now, standing in the heart of the ancient temple, it felt real. The artifact, the key to her people's future, had been returned to its rightful place, and with it, the power to restore what was lost. Ethan's thoughts turned to his crew, to the people who had fought beside him. He could see them gathered in the distance, some tending to the wounded, others talking quietly among themselves. They had all been through so much, but they had never once wavered in their loyalty to each other. Ethan had been their leader, but now he realized they were all part of something far greater than any one of them. They had helped to save an empire, and in doing so, they had found a new purpose. As if reading his mind, Salora spoke again. Thank you, Ethan. You've done more than just help me. You've helped my people, and I'll never forget that. Ethan gave a small, awkward smile, shrugging as he did. We all did our part, but you're the one who led us here. Without you, none of this would have been possible. She didn't argue, but her eyes softened. We make a good team, don't we? The words hung in the air for a moment, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder if she was speaking of more than just their mission. There had been moments, small moments, where he had caught a glimpse of something more between them. The way she had looked at him during the battle, the brief touches, the shared moments of understanding. They had both been through so much, and somehow they had found a way to trust each other. But now, as they stood together in the aftermath of their victory, Ethan knew there was no time for anything more. Not yet. You're right, he said finally. We did. Salora's gaze drifted to the horizon beyond the temple, her thoughts seemingly far away. I can't restore the empire overnight. There's so much to rebuild, so many pieces to put together. But now, for the first time, I believe it's possible. I'll need your help, Ethan, and I'll need all of them. Ethan followed her gaze, taking in the sprawling landscape outside the temple. There was so much work to do, and the weight of it settled on his shoulders. The empire had been shattered, and there were many who would want to see it remain that way. But he knew Salora wouldn't back down. She had already proven that. We'll be here, Ethan said, his voice firm. We'll help you however we can. Salora turned back to him, her expression filled with gratitude. You've already done more than I could ever ask for. The others were gathering now, their voices carrying in the wind as they began to pack up and prepare for the journey ahead. Ethan's crew had already proven themselves in battle, and they would continue to fight for what was right. But it wasn't just the mercenaries who would be needed. It was the people of the Arisian Empire, the survivors, the ones who had lost everything but their hope. They would need to come together, and they would need to trust in one another as the day began to fade, casting long shadows across the temple ruins. Ethan found himself standing beside Salora once more. The battle had been won, but the real fight, one for the future, was just beginning. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose again. Not just as a soldier or a mercenary, but as someone who was part of something bigger. Something that could change the galaxy. Together, with the artifact in Salora's hands and their allies at their side, they would rebuild the Arisian Empire, stronger than it had ever been before. The future was uncertain, but as the stars began to shine overhead, Ethan couldn't help but believe that it was a future worth fighting for.